Hi, welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is Vanessa and I'm the president of Pro REA Staffing. We're a recruiting firm that specializes in placing admin staff on real estate teams. And in this series, we are exploring careers in real estate. And I'm really excited to have Alex here today to talk about what the heck a transaction coordinator is and what they do. Alex is the owner and founder of Minnesota Transaction Coordinators. And so thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Cool. So let's start off with the basics. So what exactly is a transaction coordinator and what is their role in the transaction process?
Absolutely. So a transaction coordinator is, exactly what the role sounds like. It's overseeing any real estate transactions, and it's typically from contract through close. For some TCs, that's going to be purchase agreement through closing, and for other transaction coordinators, it's going to be listing rep or buyer rep all the way through closing. It depends if you're on, a traditional real estate team, what states you serve, or if you're independent, where you jump in the process. Ultimately, it's interesting because TCs are typically looked at as, we're small but mighty. We don't have like the most glamorous role out there in the real estate industry. But without transaction coordinators, truly teams or individual producing agents don't function. We serve the most important role oftentimes in the transactional process. And ultimately, our role is so important because that's what leads to repeat and referral business for real estate agents. So although sometimes it feels like our role can be a little redundant or isn't necessarily the most appreciated, it is generally the most important role in the entire transaction.
Fantastic.
Yeah. To kind of get into some of the basics of what a transaction coordinator does or what falls into that job description, it's going to be helping check all the details. So, crossing the T's, dotting the I's, making sure that purchase agreements are filled out correctly and that nothing is missing, helping keep on track of dates and deadlines for the contract. So inspection timeframes, well and septic, appraisals, loan commitment letters, keeping everyone on top of those, making sure that everything is all set for compliance, and then helping keep communication flowing between lender, the closer or title company, the other agent, and most importantly, the clients. So making sure the buyers and sellers are happy throughout the entire process. Truly, you're orchestrating the entire transaction. It is yours to own.
Yeah, so it is the perfect job for somebody who loves to manage projects, is really good with paperwork, deadlines, and details, and is good at being that center hub that keeps everybody and everything flowing. And they can do that for multiple projects at the same time, and everything's moving very fast and everything's at different stages, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Whenever we're hiring for a transaction coordinator, we always advertise. This is for someone who is hyper detail oriented and can move at a really fast pace and oversee many different projects at one time. And that's a really unique skill set, and you don't find people with that combination of skills too often.
Yeah, you can't be passive in this role, can you? I mean, you have to really have a backbone. You're pushing for things, you're advocating for your client, for your agent, and you're pushing things sometimes, right?
Absolutely.
Not just being reactive and collecting things. I mean, you very much have to be willing to push and follow up for the third time and make a phone call and a text and walk down the hall and rattle a cage sometimes, right? To get things done. You have to be on top of it and assertive.
Yes, you do. You have to be relentless to get what you need in order to continue pushing the transactions forward.
Now, is the role of a TC the same all the way across the country, or do things vary state to state?
Yeah. So as a transaction coordinator, it doesn't necessarily matter what state you're in. The role of a transaction coordinator for being the key person when it comes to communication and details, that doesn't change. Some of the terminology and some of who you're communicating with or the inspections types or disclosures might change. But ultimately, a transaction coordinator in California is the same as a transaction coordinator in Minnesota. Just how we approach our positions or some of the things that we're tracking might be a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. So let's go through a typical day for a transaction coordinator.
Yeah. So I love that you talked about, responsiveness, right? We can't necessarily always be passive. The way that I think really successful transaction coordinators set up their day is by focusing on their proactive tasks in the morning. So getting everything that you need that's proactive done before noon. What that looks like is, reaching out and being that bulldog and asking, hey, where is this amendment, or where is this loan commitment letter? Processing new files and making sure that everyone has what they need. The afternoons is where I recommend being passive. So that's getting into your inbox and dealing with, other people's problems or other people's asks of you. There, everyone in real estate feels like something's on fire or there's an emergency, and truly most things can wait an hour or two. So you can, focus on those really proactive tasks first and some of those more reactive tasks later on in the day. If you find yourself being someone who struggles with that, you like to keep your inbox at 0 and it drives you a little crazy when you see things filtering through. The two things that I recommend there are Gmail has inbox pause, or a lot of email systems use that. Use that to structure your morning so you can focus on what you need to do first. And the other thing is, if you, for whatever reason don't feel comfortable with that, just set up an auto reply and say, hey, I received this. I'm going to be checking my emails again at 2 p.m. or whatever works best for you. So structure your day, proactive things first, reactive things second. And proactive section, like I said, you're going to be focused on things that you need. So being a little bit selfish to make sure that all those transactions keep pushing through.
And how many transactions can a TC typically handle on their own?
Really good question. It depends, right? So if we're looking at an in-house team transaction coordinator that works with one real estate team, it depends on the state too. In California, you might be looking closer to 10 or 15. Here in Minnesota, you might be looking closer to 30 or 40. It depends greatly on how many tasks you own and how much client communication you're having. If you're calling your clients a lot, you're probably going to be smaller on the workload. If we're looking at independent transaction coordinators, typically those numbers can be a little bit higher. I'd say about 50% higher. So in California, you might be closer to 20 to 30 pendings at a time. Here in Minnesota, you can get closer up to 50 or 60 pendings at a time.
Can you talk a little bit more about why a California TC can't handle as many files?
Yeah, so California is a whole different beast. I think in California, they have 53 disclosures depending on the county and the location. There's a lot that goes into being, in real estate and specifically transaction coordinating in California. If you happen to be someone who is either serving in California or you're about to be working in California, there are California-specific Facebook pages and support groups, and there's even a TC certification program in that state. I would highly recommend that just because it is so different. If you're outside of California, any of the other 49 states, transaction coordination is a lot easier, and you can learn to become a TC a whole lot faster in those states.
And do you have to live in a state in which you support agents?
You don't. So my team, for instance, there's 9 of us. Only 2 of the 9 of us actually live here in Minnesota. The rest, we believe in hiring wherever the talent is. So we go that route. I know a fabulous TC who lives in Tennessee, and she closes Texas transactions. So you don't have to live where you work, right? You do have to take into consideration where your business was established and the tax guidelines and the employment guidelines of those states. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
So you do have to be considerate of that. But if you're looking to become an independent TC and you maybe live in California and you don't want to deal with some of the ins and outs there, you can certainly learn the ins and outs of another state and offer your services there.
So this is a good time to talk about the difference between independent TC and a TC who works for an office or for an individual agent or team.
Sure. So I always come from the perspective of an individual transaction coordinator. That's my business. So we aren't affiliated with a brokerage. We aren't affiliated with a specific team. What we are is we're an independent third-party company that agents can hire for their contracts on a per contract basis. There's a lot of TCs who run their businesses that way or who are in that model, just because that's when you become a business owner, right? And we can talk a little bit more about what that looks like and some of the pros and cons there in a second. So that's the first one. Some offices, especially like Keller Williams offices recently, are starting to hire transaction coordinators for their brokerages. So they serve all the agents in that office. And again, that's on a per contract basis. And then some teams hire an in-house transaction coordinator for the team, which serves the team leader and then any of the buyer's agents or listing agents on that team. That's a great add to the administrative staff. Typically, the TC is not going to be doing executive assistant services. They're just truly focused on running the transaction contract through close. Sorry, work from home.
Love it. Well, and I think it's worth mentioning the kind of the career trajectory on either side. So if you are a TC for a team, you might start out as an unlicensed transaction coordinator. You might eventually grow into a transaction manager. Transaction managers are licensed and they handle the negotiations from the moment an offer is accepted to close. And they are highly compensated as salaried employees at that level. On the other side, I guess you could talk about the career trajectory of becoming an independent TC and then what the options are for growth on that side.
So when people are choosing, do I want to be on a traditional real estate team or do I want to own my own transaction coordination business? You have to really be self-aware of, what drives you and what you're looking for. A lot of admins in the real estate industry are typically going to be SC personality types if we're talking DISC. Those are people who really like consistency and stability in their lives. Being a business owner doesn't generally equal stability and consistency, especially when we're talking real estate where, the markets can really fluctuate. Here in Minnesota, for instance, Q1, only 10% of our business is done in all of Q1. Do I have enough money in savings to continue paying myself and my team during that time? Or, what position would I be in if I didn't? That's a decision that people have to make before they become business owners. So jokingly, I thought when you start a TC business, you're starting it for the freedom and flexibility it provides. And those are also some of the negatives when you're starting a business is sometimes you lose that freedom and sometimes you lose that flexibility. So you just have to be very self-aware of what's going to be a bigger driver for you. Independently, of course, there isn't a cap. No one is telling me what I can or cannot make. No one is telling me the vacations that I can take or where I can work. No one is dictating those things. So really the sky's the limit when you're a business owner. You can take it wherever you desire and your income can be anything you desire. Typically, independent TCs, when you get started, we're going to see someone making about $40,000 to $60,000 a year. I know plenty of transaction coordinators, and back when I started my business and I was an individual TC, I was making over $100,000 a year, which on a traditional real estate team isn't generally possible.
No.
So there's definitely positives to being a business owner, and there's also certainly some negatives.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's really helpful for people to understand. So people always want to know, like, how do TCs get paid? Who's paying them? And how does that all sort out?
Certainly. So independent perspective, most transaction coordinators charge a flat file fee. If you're unsure what to charge, a good guesstimate is about 5% of the agent's gross commission. So here in Minnesota, our agent's gross commission is about $7,500, if I'm remembering correctly. That puts us right around the $300 to $350 mark, which is where you see all the TCs in our market. In California, I just keep using that as an example because they are so diverse. That average sale price is a whole lot higher. We see transaction coordinators charging between 400 and 500 transactions on average in that state. Mm-hmm. So it just depends. Do your research, look and see what your competition charges. If you're unsure, that 5% rule seems to be a pretty good one to follow. Typically, you don't get paid unless the file closes. Some TCs do charge a cancellation fee. That's usually about $50 to $100. Most don't. Most only get paid if the transaction closes. And generally, it's going to be the agent who pays for it. Sometimes they do ask the buyers or sellers to pay for it, but generally it will be the agent. And sometimes you can get paid directly from the closing statement. Sometimes you get paid directly from the agent's commission from the office. And other times, this is what I do. I charge the agent directly. So that way they're the ones getting the tax benefit and I'm in full control of when I get the payment.
So I would think that it would be easier to make sure you got paid if you're paid out of closing versus from the agent. How does that work out to be better for you?
So every state is different, right? If someone is looking to become an independent TC, find someone who already serves that state and ask them about their business and what they've learned or what can or cannot be done. Here in Minnesota, I can't be paid from the closing statement. It's just not allowed. Title companies will not let it happen. I can't be paid from the brokerages because then they issue me the 1099 instead of the agents issuing me the 1099, which isn't correct. The agents are the one who hire me, not the brokerage. So that's why we have to charge payment individually, or we have to do it independently, I should say.
Got it. Okay. So at what point did you decide to start hiring other transaction coordinators underneath you, and talk about the growth of your team?
Yeah. So when I started my business, I wrote out I wrote out a business plan, and I knew that someday I would have another TC. The reason why I started this business was because I recently had a baby, but when I started my business, I didn't, and I knew I never wanted anyone to dictate how much time I got to take or what my schedule looked like when I started my family. And in order for me to, continue pushing forward on that journey, I needed a team behind me so I could actually take a maternity leave. So I started hiring on my team actually within that first year. And it was because I was above capacity. I was working 14-hour days, and I didn't realize I needed someone to help me until like 3 months after I was working 14-hour days. I didn't think it was time. I thought I had to be in the business longer. And ultimately, I always think it's smart to hire sooner rather than later. As soon as you can justify hiring that person and paying a salary or paying those wages, make that hire, because you don't have to be the person who's submitting compliance on your files. You don't have to be the person who's breaking down and processing the files. You can hire somebody to do those things and pay them 15 to 20 an hour, and you can be making more money by getting that leverage. So I'm a big fan, the sooner the better. And not everyone should also be a business owner or an employer, right?
Amen.
That's a special skill set.
Speaking to the choir here.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You really do need to decide if that is a responsibility you want to take on, and if you have a heart for leading, managing, and taking care of other people.
Absolutely. It's as soon as you hire somebody, that is your job. Your job is keeping that person employed, making sure that they have what they need to be successful, and making sure that you're empowering them and getting out of their way, assuming that they're fabulous in the role, right? And that you've given them what they need. I hear this a lot, where the biggest problem you'll ever have is people. And as soon as you get into management, that's true. You have to focus on your people. Your people come first, then your clients, and then your transactions.
Yeah. Yeah. So you definitely need to decide if that is what you want to do. And if
Absolutely.
you're good at that, if that's your like your mission in life is to help bring up other people. So how does somebody get into this career? I mean, it definitely sounds like a career where you have to learn a lot of vocabulary. There's a lot of specific things you need to know. How do you get started?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of different ways you can get started. First, I'd recommend be very strategic in what states you enter, even if you live in a state. So I started here in Minnesota because it's where I live. Knowing what I know now, I would have done some more research. I still probably would have chosen to start my business here in Minnesota. Our contracts are really straightforward. There's not a whole lot of disclosures. There's plenty of agents. And when I started my business, there weren't very many TC companies. There were only 2 that I could find in my state. There was, I think, 18,000 agents at the time. So a huge opportunity to serve a lot of different people. So doing your research between, market opportunity, is it completely saturated, or, can you get in and get a pretty good chunk of the market? And then also, how difficult will the contracts be, and about how many do you think you can manage? If you're unsure, there are Facebook pages where you can go and you can say, hey, who's in Minnesota? And people will chime. Most transaction coordinators are very open and willing to help share and, share those, here's what worked and here's what didn't stories and what to expect. It's a really, really open and friendly community. So that's a great place to start. If you have issues finding a transaction coordinator that you can bounce ideas off of, approach the brokers and say, I want to start this business. Can I pick your brain, and what can we do to bring value to your agents and to your office? Usually if you come from that perspective, brokers are going to be really open to having conversations with you because you're going to bring value to their offices or their agents and make things sticky. And you can do that without being affiliated with that specific office.
And what about getting training on the basics of like actually how to manage transactions?
Totally. There are a couple of transaction coordinator training programs out there. You can look into those, do your research, see if that's the right fit for you. Otherwise, asking another TC to walk you through their process or through the contract, or asking a broker, hey, can you walk me through the contract and through the process just as I establish mine? I want to make sure I'm not missing any details. Usually some of those options are going to be the best.
And is that how you got started?
That is, yeah. So when I started specifically with one brokerage here in Minnesota. I sat down with the broker and I asked, walk me through the contract. What am I missing? What do I need to know? What are key things here? And then I also met with a couple of executive assistants because executive assistants know what's going on. For teams that aren't large enough for a transaction coordinator, that EA is going to be filling the TC role too. They can tell you the systems that they've built and what they're specifically watching out for. That's oftentimes going to be a great option for someone as well.
Great, and I'll add some links to this video for some of those other resources so you can check out some other programs. Perfect.
Awesome.
So one last thing, we talked about this a little bit at the top of our conversation, but I just want to kind of hammer it home. What are some of the clues that somebody's going to be successful in this role and who probably isn't a good fit to be a transaction coordinator?
Definitely. So I'm a big fan of using the DISC. I'll say this, just because your DISC says one thing doesn't say you are going to be great or not great in a role. Typically, SC personalities are going to be the best transaction coordinators, followed by DC personality types. It's because you have that really high attention to detail and you're either very consistent in your approach or you're a great driver, so you know I need this and I'm going to go get it. I'm an IS personality type. And again, guys, I made over 100,000 my first year in the business. Just because your DISC says one thing doesn't mean that you either are or aren't great in a role. But typically those are folks who, based on a personality profile, will do very well. If you're thinking about maybe getting into TCing, I would ask yourself, am I comfortable being pretty routine in my day? There's not a whole lot of variety in this position. The variety comes in with the different people that you work with or the differences in contracts, which for me is actually pretty exciting, but for some people it's like, oh my gosh, I'm doing the same thing every single day. That is not for me. So what level of variety are you looking for in your position? Are you willing to be assertive to get what you need? Because this position does have a certain level of assertiveness. And how detail-oriented are you? Because that's why agents hire us. They're typically not super detail-oriented, and they need someone who can help make sure that everything is perfect and that nothing is being missed. So if you're responsive, if you're aggressive, and if you're detail-oriented, this is probably a great position for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This was so helpful. I'm sure people got a ton of value out of this. So thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. We post new content like this all the time, and make sure to go to proreastaffing.com to check out our Day in the Life series, which are interviews with different professionals about their career and a day in their life, and our job board to check out opportunities in real estate. Thanks.